why this abandoned restaurant in Chicago is still a hotspot for ghost hunters. The loud crash echoed through the empty restaurant, shaking the dusty windows as a broken chair slid across the floor all by itself. The ghost hunters froze, their flashlights trembling in their hands. At the center of the dining room, where the old owner had once been found after the robbery years ago, a tall shadow lifted its head, even though nothing living was there. The air grew so cold that everyone could see their breath. Then the shadow moved closer, slow and steady, as if it had been waiting for someone to return. One of the hunters, Mark Evans, whispered, "We shouldn't be here." But before he finished, the shadow rushed toward them, knocking the lights out all at once. And something grabbed Mark by the shoulder. Before that terrifying night, the place had only been known as Lakeside Grill, a small family restaurant on the south side of Chicago. It had closed almost 20 years earlier after a robbery went wrong, leaving the owner, Mr. Daniel Weaver, lifeless behind the counter. After the crime, the building was left abandoned. Nobody wanted to reopen it, and most people in the neighborhood avoided even walking past it at night. Some said they heard knocking from inside when the place was empty. Others swore they saw someone standing at the window, even though the restaurant had no electricity and no one had stepped inside for years. Still, ghost hunters loved places like this, especially when they came with real tragedies attached. That's why Mark, his cousin Emily, their friend Tyler, and a quiet rookie named James decided to visit the restaurant on a cold November evening. They wanted to record paranormal activity for their small online channel. It was supposed to be like any other abandoned building adventure, creepy but harmless. When they arrived, the building looked exactly like the stories described it. Dark, boarded-up windows, and a faded sign hanging sideways above the door. The metal frame of the entrance was rusted, and the glass was cracked like a spiderweb. Emily turned on her camera and whispered, "We're here at the abandoned Lakeside Grill in Chicago, a known hotspot for ghost hunters. Let's see if the stories are true." They had no idea they were walking into something far worse than just spooky rumors. Inside, the air smelled like mold and old grease. Tables were still set up as if customers had just left in a hurry. Salt shakers stood untouched. Menus lay scattered on the floor. It was like time had stopped the night of the crime. James kept rubbing his arms, saying the cold felt strange, like it was going through him instead of around him. The group separated to explore. Mark and Emily headed toward the kitchen, pushing aside hanging pots that creaked like they were swinging on their own. Tyler and James moved toward the back hallway where the storage rooms were. At first, everything seemed normal for an abandoned building: broken tiles, graffiti, and collapsed ceiling panels. But then Tyler heard something that made him stop. It was a low sound, something between a groan and a whisper. He turned to James and asked, "Did you hear that?" James nodded, though he looked too scared to speak. The whisper came again, this time closer. Tyler lifted his flashlight, and for a moment, they both saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, not moving. It looked like a man, but he was too tall and too still to be human. James reached for Tyler's arm, but the figure vanished before their eyes. They ran back to the dining room, shouting for Mark and Emily. In the dining room, Mark was staring at a set of footprints on the dusty floor. They were fresh, too fresh for an empty place. Emily filmed them, whispering that they looked like work boots, the kind restaurant employees used back in the day. They followed the prints as they led toward the center table, stopping right at a chair that was tipped slightly to the side. Then the chair moved. Just a little. Just enough to let them know something was still there. At that moment, the whole building felt alive. Lights flickered even though the power had been cut for decades. The thin metal signs hanging on the walls clattered, as if someone was brushing past them. The air turned freezing cold, and their breath puffed out like smoke. That's when the loud crash shook the room. The moment everything went from creepy to dangerous. The shadow appeared. The temperature dropped again, and something dark crawled across the floor, like fog rising from the ground. Emily tried to scream but couldn't. The others were rooted in place as the shadow grew taller and taller, forming what looked like the figure of a man, but twisted, like his body was bent the wrong way. Then the lights snapped off, plunging them into total darkness. Mark felt a hand, ice cold, strong, and very real, grab his shoulder from behind. And just as he turned to see what was touching him, something dragged him backward into the dark. Mark's scream echoed through the restaurant as his flashlight rolled across the floor, spinning until its beam pointed toward the hallway where he'd been pulled. Emily, Tyler, and James froze, terrified to move, terrified not to move. For a few long seconds, all they heard was Mark's panicked breathing somewhere deep in the dark. Then even that stopped. "Mark!" Emily shouted, her voice shaking. She took one step forward, but the cold hit her so hard it felt like she'd walked into a freezer. The darkness ahead seemed thicker than normal, almost like it was alive. Tyler lifted his trembling flashlight. "We have to get him. We can't leave him in there." James nodded, though his face had gone pale. He whispered, "What if it's waiting for us?" Emily swallowed hard. "We don't have a choice." They followed the narrow hallway where Mark had disappeared. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Their lights flickered, struggling to stay on. On the floor, they found Mark's shoe, lying sideways like it had been yanked off. Emily bent down, picking it up with shaking hands. "Mark wouldn't run," she said softly. "Something took him." They moved farther in until they reached the old walk-in freezer. The thick metal door stood slightly open, even though it was heavy and always slammed shut on its own. James pointed toward it with a trembling hand. "He's in there. I know he's in there." Emily pushed the door open, the metal groaning like it was angry. The flashlight beams shook as they pointed inside. At first, they saw nothing but darkness and frost. Then slowly, shapes began to form. On the back wall, someone had scratched deep marks, long, desperate claw-like lines. "Fresh. Too fresh." Tyler whispered. "These weren't here before. Someone or something just made them." Then, from the corner of the freezer, came a soft tap. Then another. Then a slow, dragging sound. Emily stepped back, her breath shaking. Something was moving just out of their light. "Who's there?" she called out. A voice whispered back, but it didn't sound like Mark. It sounded like someone speaking through broken air, like a person who hadn't used their voice in years. The sound drifted around them, coming from every direction at once. "Leave." The three of them stumbled out of the freezer, so fast they almost fell. As soon as they reached the hallway, the freezer door slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang. Emily grabbed the handle, tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. "We're not leaving Mark," Emily said. "We have to try somewhere else." They hurried deeper into the restaurant, past the ruined bathrooms, and down another hallway lined with old photos of the restaurant's opening day. The pictures were covered in grime, but the eyes of the people in them seemed strangely clear, as if the faces were watching. James turned away. "I don't want to look at those." But Emily stopped. One photo, an old picture of Mr. Daniel Weaver, the owner, was different. Someone had scratched a dark shape standing behind him, just like the shadow they had seen earlier. Tyler frowned. "Do you think that shadow is him? The owner?" Emily shook her head. "No. The police said he died here. Whatever is in this building, it's not human anymore." They continued forward until they finally reached the old office where the safe had once been kept. It was rumored that the owner had tried to fight off the robbers here. The desk was overturned. Papers were scattered across the floor. The room felt heavier than the others, like the very air was weighed down. Then they heard it, a soft, desperate knocking from inside the walls. "Help me," a voice whispered. This time it sounded like Mark. Emily pressed her ear against the wall. "Mark, we're here." The knocking grew louder, more frantic. Tyler looked around. Maybe there's a crawl space, the hidden door? They searched the room, pushing shelves aside, kicking broken boxes. James spotted a metal latch on the floor, half hidden under debris. He pulled it open, revealing a narrow stairway leading into darkness. Emily's heart raced. Mark must be down there. They climbed down one by one, the stairs creaking under their feet. The basement was colder than anything they'd felt upstairs. Their flashlights shivered with static. The air smelled like dust, rust, and something else. Something rotten. A long hallway stretched ahead, full of storage crates and old appliances. And at the very end, barely visible, was Mark. He sat on the floor, facing the wall, his head hanging low. "Mark!" Emily ran toward him, But halfway down the hallway, Mark slowly lifted his head. His eyes were wide and empty, staring past them, not at them. His lips trembled as he whispered, "It's behind you." All three turned at the same time. A tall figure stood in the dark, its body shifting like smoke, its face twisted and broken like glass. It reached out a long, shadowy hand toward them, and the basement lights exploded, plunging everything into darkness as the creature lunged forward.